Okay, welcome back to our work meeting. We'll jump right in, go to 4.3. Harewood City Streetlight Banner Program and External.
So if you all would pull this sheet out that I did before the meeting, John, can you pull up the spreadsheet, the 4.2 spreadsheet?
Can you say backpack?
So Trevor and Monty have been working on this for the last couple weeks. What we wanted to do is just update you that our numbers are not right. So the presentation that Kyle gave earlier today about our banner program, the actual cost, there were a lot of things not factored into the actual cost. And now that we got Super Trevor, we're able to more closely identify what the costs actually are. This is the cost per banner. Now on your map that you have in front of you, that kind of orangish red are banner poles and streets that are wide enough that just our staff can handle, safety-wise, right? So they'll pull the 350 up behind them with the lights and flashers on, behind the bucket truck. The bucket truck will go up, change the banner, they'll move to the next one. The streets that are in blue do not have a shoulder. And so we've asked our police department to go out with our bucket truck. And I got to see it yesterday. When did we go out? Yesterday in the snow. How people do not pay attention to even our police flashing lights. It was terrifying. So our blue streets that are on this map are our small cross sections that don't have shoulders. That's your Harriman Main Street and this Sentinel Ridge and 134th. Also some of our busier streets, especially during school times. John's pulled that up there. The orange streets, we do have those shoulders, and so we're able to facilitate those banners. But when you go back to the spreadsheet, John, we calculate that this is the cost per pole, $73.25 per pole. That includes removing them, which was not in the other allocation that we went into. Yep. And then the blue is when we have HPD assisting us. That's per pole.
Per pole. That's including banner cost?
No.
That's labor.
That's the.
This is the staff cost.
Because they have to pay for
Yeah.
currently they have to pay for the banner.
Holy moly.
Now, the permit fee, the good news is the actual application fee is almost spot on. It's 57. And we're charging 50. So we're really good on that one. But once we factor everything in, you can see that the 2250 we're currently collecting per pole is not covering our costs. Not even close.
Wow.
So there's a couple options. One, you can just say we're not doing any external banners at all anymore. That protects us from some First Amendment issues, and maybe I don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
One of the concern is we're getting banners from outside groups. Mostly the schools. I think if we stick with other governments, we're probably okay, but as soon as we start to do it with others, you run into an issue of creating a public forum on those polls, and if somebody you don't appreciate comes in and wants to, and they pay the fee, you have to let those go up. You get yourselves into trouble. So there's an argument to be made that we should only put up city banners. Again, I think you could, if you left it to other governmental agencies, you're probably safer.
Can we reference our proclamation ordinance and say it has to follow the same things?
Well,
Not a bad idea.
unfortunately, the First Amendment, that's really taught is at a conference right now, but that would be a question you could ask him. I don't believe, really, you can only regulate time, place, manner once you create a forum. And so it's just something to be aware of, because we've been approached since I've been here, where we want to put up a nonprofit group. Well, good, we just want to come and put up banners and we'd like to do it. They're not affiliated with anybody. And I've so far told them, no, we don't do that. Because while I might personally think, yeah, that's a good cause, if the next group comes in, I'm willing to pay your fee and I want it from these days to these days per your group. The other thing I don't know is if they're paying it for a certain amount of time. In other cities I've been in where we did do it because we were letting other groups do it, they were paying for the amount of time they were on the pole.
Say Bullfrog
But I would
splits
just say
them out
don't
in
do it.
front of them, like, that would be,
So
we could easily see that happen for advertising
For
or whatever,
businesses.
for businesses. But that would open that door.
Yeah, you wouldn't,
Yeah.
you normally would, I said I've had places where we did, but I would just say from a, it's better not to open that door.
It's also tough when I'm driving down 134th and I'm seeing Sentinel or Mountain Ridge banners or Harriman banners, like, I would associate it more towards their school areas, but I don't know.
The other issue that we've had with the school banners is they bring us the banners. We look at them, we say, yes, they're good, right, Monty?
Correct.
Yes, those fit what we're looking for. They go and get them printed, they bring them back. Usually the quality is not great, and so those tear or they completely, I think there were
The
a couple
wind,
from
yeah.
Mountain Ridge that completely flew off in the wind.
I've
And
even seen
then-
some of our city stuff fall off.
Yeah. And then it becomes, well, where's my child's banner? Or when are you going to replace my child's banner? And
Is there a fee or a thing to
We
re-put
have
it back
not.
up? Okay.
we have, and I like them. I think they're a great way to talk about community pride. I know that they give those to the kids after the fact. I think they use them for a fundraiser type situation. But there's a significant cost to the city to provide that service. And so I think the discussion, and the other thing I thought was maybe we could co-brand some banners specific to the high school. For example, welcome back to school for the schools in that area, or happy graduation, Harriman City and the school's named. There's an
I
option
know
there.
friends at Harriman's thought about like for Memorial Day and Veterans Day and stuff.
We kind of push them away
Hometown
from
heroes,
it.
I know,
Kind of
yeah.
push them away for this
Yeah.
very reason.
Can you just put a sign up in your yard if it's your kid?
Yeah.
I mean, I just
Those
wonder
yard
why
signs, yeah.
we need to have them on the city light posts.
Yeah.
It is, I mean, it's great and I understand the community aspect of it, but it just seems like there's
Well,
an awful lot of cost liability.
If they're willing to pay $100 a pole to do it, I'm not opposed to it, but I just don't think that we should be subsidizing that.
There definitely has to be a time frame though too, because we got 4 high schools, right? Multiple schools.
And is that's used of our police officers'
That's what
time
I
to
was-
follow in a
that's
bucket
my
truck
next
around
question.
or our F-350s to follow a bucket truck around? I just wonder if that's really basic services versus, I mean, I just worry that we're just, because all that, even though they're gonna pay it, that means that we have to take officers
There's a loss.
or city staff that are already stretched thin and put them on an additional. It's hard because I think it's part of a growing pain in our community. I think when you're a small community, you can do that type of thing more. And as you grow and you get bigger and bigger, it just becomes like, it doesn't become effective at some point.
It may be a program that we could bring back at a certain time too, like our Christmas lights, we shrunk them down, but hopefully expanding those in the future when budgetary constraints aren't.
Get rid of it, though. Like Steve, I'm kind of where Steve is. If they're willing to pay that, I think the price alone and an increased price is gonna filter out some. I think there's gonna be some groups that won't pay it.
I would also restrict those blue areas.
Yeah.
That would be my first go-to.
So I got three things. One, I totally agree, limit it to governmental, 100%. We don't wanna open that door or get mired in that. And then two, I think we limit where it can be done. It needs to be on the ones that are easy, right? For all those safety reasons, and no, it's not a good use of our police officers' time to go and watch traffic while we're trying to hang banners up for the school. But if we limit that, and then I think there needs to be a time limit, right? So we don't end up with those disintegration issues. And then as long as we're not subsidizing, if it really covers the cost, and I think you have to, inflation's real for everything, right? You've gotta have a multiplier in there every single year. So if we do it within the bounds that make sense and we're not paying for subsidizing it, I mean, there is a community benefit to it.
But how do you regulate the other issue you were talking about quality of banners and things like that, because you bring them in approved and then they're not the quality, so then that's another additional and time and resource that we have to spend to make sure everything is up to quality on those kind of things.
Or we just say, we're not responsible after they're put up.
But
If they
it,
rip
does
them
it
to
become
fly
any
away.
kind of a safety issue? I'd hate
Some
for
are
a
whipping
banner
in the
to fly
wind
on my
or
window
something,
as
yeah.
I'm driving down the
Yeah.
road.
And do we give them a spec, it has to be this type of material?
They give them a
that-
size.
And the problem with it has been, when we tell them we won't supply the banner, you guys have to supply the banner, we really lose control.
Do we have a
Yeah.
vendor, do we have approved vendors that we could send them to?
We in the past have tried to recommend certain materials, and that they're sewn and that they also have a grommet in them so that we can zip time to the poles so
Yeah.
that they do come undone. Usually we can find the banner.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult. The other thing too is every now and then we'll have bad winds out here.
What?
I know
Every
nobody,
other day.
but they'll actually pull one of the banner arms that attaches it to the pole.
Will come off.
Will actually come off, and I worry about people getting hit with one of those.
Bad.
I'm with Jared then, those are my three. I think if I fit those three, I'm with Jared.
Well, with the timing, I think that you could, I mean, I don't know if it's quarterly, monthly, 60 days, that next group goes up, so you're only out one time pulling down and replacing. They have to go, like,
Yeah.
starts and stops at the, so you're only out there one time.
Yeah, so removal.
Removal and
Removal.
replacement,
Maybe.
yeah.
You only do them
Kinda
these
split the
times,
cost.
these are the only,
I'll set some
so
certain.
if they,
Set
yeah, so
certain
if it's,
time
if they
frames.
can be up for, say, take your 60 days.
Lacrosse
We
and then
only do
football
them
and then
these 3
whatever,
times a year.
So they come down in a
Fall,
full
winter,
set
spring.
banner, so you're only accessing one pole at the same time, yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great idea.
That makes
I
sense.
mean, that would make, it'd probably be easy for staff, they're dropping one in one pile and pulling out from the other, right?
And it ends up that way quite often. The high schools, they like them up all the time.
You need a break.
They don't want them ever to come down. It's
You're just
right in
switching
front of the
names,
school,
and-
right?
Stay calm.
Sentinel Ridge is one of the blue areas,
That
so
lower section, yeah.
We
Where's
making
your
a,
little sign on your computer?
he just rubbed it.
I mean, I think that maybe a certain radius around that high school would probably be fine, but that is a dangerous road, or it's an after hours call out and it's a
Well, then it's
higher
even-
fee, yeah. And
And going forward, they will not be on 134th.
Okay.
Mountain Ridge won't. That'll be city banners that will move.
okay, yeah, and I think that might be.
Main Street, 126th,
So it's only on the orange staff line, that's what you're saying?
yeah.
I think we saw, Wendy was taking pictures, I was driving down the street and I saw them out there, I was like, holy cow, I didn't realize that's what they were doing, scary.
Yeah, I have videos, it's not pretty.
134.
So we all come to those three.
I'm just imagining 600 people in a council meeting yelling at us because they can't put up their kids and banners.
Yard signs, I mean, even the peg and the yard signs around your arena, around your facility, even if they're banners in the wall, they can still put up banners, just, but is the group's gonna come and pay $100 a banner? Plus the printing costs? We'll see, right?
What's your,
Have
what's
you
your,
seen football parents?
Yeah, but
I
it's all
mean-
booster club money, right? So it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, they spend lots of money on, socks and Velcro
Did you help them
banners
pick out
and
the
all
Harriman new
kinds.
socks?
so we're still saying we're gonna do it, what's your concern, the time frame? Cause Jared's saying yes to schools and governments.
We're
and-
saying nothing between May and September. That's what.
Only school in session.
Yeah, that's great, yeah, I think
because
that's true.
city banner
So
time.
what I
We're
would say
not-
is that we're not taking them down until there's other ones going up.
No, we wouldn't do that. Because that would be, we would leave them up all year in some cases.
Except for the
Right.
last ones, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, but what I'm saying is we don't want to add additional trips that we
Right.
don't need,
Yeah.
right?
So for example, at Mountain Ridge, their dancers go up, and then the lacrossers go up.
and so one of the problems that we also have is the high school says, hey, these are our poles, we want them up from now till the end of the season. And then one of their auxiliary groups will come in and say, hey, we want the same poles with our banners, and so they're working back and forth with them. Typically is what we've told them in the past is, what you're hanging them up for is 30 days. After that, somebody else comes in and wants to utilize that pole, they have the option to do it. If not, we'll leave them up for an additional 30 days for up to 3 months.
That's
And
probably
every
good.
30 days they
I like
pay
that.
the other another $100 or $75 or, right?
No, cause this is
Only if they
including
switch
the
out.
put up and take down cost, right?
Now
So
it
that's all
is.
included.
So now it is.
But it's switching out, is that what you're saying, they're switching out every 30 days?
Well, no, it's.
Sometimes.
Say
can.
depends.
Sometimes,
Problem
that's
is
that's
the
why I think we just have to put in
But
realistic limitations, right? So if it's good for whatever period of time, choose one, so that we're only doing it a couple times a year. And they know that that's when it's available for the different groups. Whatever you wanna do,
But
I
realistically,
mean, I just going off of Teddy's
putting one up at the
comment,
same
Yeah.
time.
I think it's a good idea, whatever that typical time frame is. If it's 60 days, then it's 60
Which
days,
I'm
that's the
not
cost to
opposed
put it up and take it down. The next group knows that it's available that next 60 days, and you can put it up and take it down at the same time.
like
But that way, we're only doing it 3 or 4 times a year, not every time somebody wants these couple of polls.
But to Monty's point, though, are they gonna have two groups? Are we gonna get upset if we do a third? So maybe, to your point, I think along the same line, 30 days seems, I like a 30-day, cause then you might get a couple of different groups. And again, if you get one up and one down, and if that's why it's coming down, is you're putting another one up, then.
I mean, heck, if
Then
it's a
you're talking
fundraiser,
costs.
they can raise more money for a second banner.
Yeah.
Well, I think the issue is like, how much of staff's time are we using for this that's taking them away from
Yeah, and
other functions?
I'm
That's my
comfortable
issue.
sending them out every month to take up and put down.
Yeah,
I
It's-
mean, that
there's a
seems
risk.
like a lot.
I think you have to limit it.
60 days feels a little bit better, but 30 days is too short.
So I think one thing to keep in mind, this is per individual ballot, if we look at how much time, I don't know if we looked at total hours that our crews
Yeah,
are
they did.
doing it. I don't know if that's in one of those things, but that, I don't know how many total hours a year are we spending doing this?
Well, they're spending about 12 minutes total per banner.
Per banner.
Is what we calculate.
And how many polls?
I'm just curious how many hours, how many staff hours
The
a
last-
year are we putting towards this project?
Mobilizing and traveling and
Yeah.
all those
Yeah,
sorts
those
of
are my
things.
biggest concerns, I understand the community
So
and the
yeah,
importance, but there is a true cost.
We have a finite amount of labor available.
Exactly.
We're pulling them away from other.
And we're
15
have a
hours?
hiring freeze on
Times how
because
many
of
guys?
budget and things like that, and then we're taking people to
That's,
go.
but
30
that's
minute
if there's no
banners.
HV.
That's if there's no.
That's
no
just our two
follow-up.
streetlight.
That's 30.
30 man-hours.
So I'm hearing
One-
pretty
Maybe
consistent on
give-
government.
Yeah, maybe
For
get us a
79
proposal on
polls.
some of what those
So if we
limitations
do
and
that
things would work,
4 times a year?
what you guys think would work from your department point of view. Right.
20 hours.
What those timeframes and things, that you would prefer that would work
That's
best.
73 polls, yeah.
As part of,
Yeah,
as
we
part of
are
whatever
silent.
that policy
We're saying no.
is,
We're saying no to kill it.
That's fine.
as part of whatever that policy is, I would like to also make sure that there's some caveat in there that says, you know, subject to staff availability, right? That we're not under any obligation to put it up if there's another higher priority of the city.
Just say
Good
no.
point.
And that way,
This is like
if,
swimming at the reservoirs there.
if that way our police are taxed because, if our police are taxed because there's some operation going on or there's some need, sorry, we're not calling a police officer over
Yeah, cause that's.
to sit with a bucket truck so you can put up your banners, like it's just,
Oh,
it has to be
That's what I'm saying,
subject to.
It's nice, but it's not.
We
Oh,
have
I
tried,
agree, it's
we have tried to be strategic about it too, that's one of the assignments we actually use our community services folks for a lot in an effort to capitalize on that, investment that you have all made in that program, so to try and minimize some of that cost and not necessarily take police officers off the street for that,
Yeah.
but again, that's subject to availability and
So same
course.
thing, I'm sure they've got a heavy workload like we've been
I
talking
will-
they've got
about.
other things
you know?
going on as well.
And I'll note on that, some of the feedback I received from Zach and Adam was that, I guess Aaron has better lights than Jenny.
Yeah.
They pay more attention to Aaron's truck than Jenny's truck.
Yeah, we're working through some equipment
Okay.
upfit. But Aaron's got a brand new rig that just got upfitted, and that was actually one of the prime considerations when we did the
Now we have
upfit
to deal with the
package was
jealousy
the traffic direction.
So the orange and white
Okay.
lights don't mean anything, the red and blues do.
Okay, so,
Kind of.
so understanding direction,
Maybe.
Got that one?
get us the time frame.
Yep.
But on the orange only.
Yep.
And
So
government,
that,
government
if
only.
you wanna do orange only, that means no in front of Sentinel Ridge High School.
That's the problem, you're gonna have to allocate some
Then
sort of
that
section,
street's
so,
gone.
yeah.
Well, just that,
So maybe only that one, and it's, they pay the higher.
No way. It's a safety issue, and that's our job, right? If we're saying no to the rest of them because of safety, they all have to be no. You can't say, well, because there's a high school that we have
if they
to go on.
want that one, it's 300.
All I'm saying, this is a work meeting, when there's a vote, and we have to formally adopt a policy, then
But that's good, cause
We'll get
if
in there.
people have something to say, they should come and say it.
Yeah.
Then we have
Well,
then we
I
know
really
how to
like you guys
represent
to
them.
tell us
That's-
what you
What's
think
our ordinance
best
on
operation.
ground banners in front of the schools? It's on their property, so,
It's on their
To
property,
me,
it
just
can't be
it
within
makes
the
sense
right
to
of way,
limit it to.
and the side triangles right away, okay.
And they,
or
if they
cause
have
safety issues.
Yeah,
light poles within their parking lots, they can
yeah,
put stuff
that's
on
true,
there,
yeah.
they don't need our permission.
We're just looking at other options or other avenues for sure.
Steve's right, this is gonna be,
I'd rather discuss Black Ridge than.
Change
Just saying.
change is always tough for people, and there's always the parents gonna be like, I want my kids there, but
so-and-so did it last year, my sibling.
I spent $6,000 over so many summers doing travel things, so my kid could go to school just so I could get
we
their
just spent.
banner on the pole, and now you're telling me
$600 for high school soccer, we didn't get a banner.
You wanna
Tell me
do
what- tell me
That's,
what we got
and
for
that's
them.
the other thing is that discrepancy between the different sport groups or the drama club or the DECA club or none of them get banners.
Well, I think they use their money a little more.
Well, you gotta be in the glory sport if
I
you're gonna do it right,
I
like,
guess so.
Okay, we beat the dead horse, you good? We know where
You're
going.
good on that part, we still gotta talk about printing services.
Oh,
So that breakdown is in your packet. This is the external printing that sometimes we do for groups like PTAs. They'll come in and we'll print banners and things for them because they don't have that ability at their school. So
I didn't know we were doing that.
it doesn't happen very often.
I've been sitting at this table for more than 80 years now, that's the first time I've ever heard that.
It doesn't happen very
Why are
often,
we?
Can we just
but it
not?
does, yeah, that's what we're.
So we're asking if we,
Yeah,
Done.
please, no,
Yeah.
yes.
Send
we're
them
not really a
to,
print shop.
send them to
No,
free
no,
shops.
yeah.
There's a plenty of them around.
It doesn't happen often, but we do get requests.
It seems like we're stealing business from
Wow.
the private.
What I've heard
Yes,
from it
private.
is, some of the print shops will have like a $30 or $50 minimum, and so we were doing like,
Banana falls
we had the
under
sticky
that,
back
it's
paper
something that
and
they
stuff
could
they
do
don't have, so.
when we were much smaller.
And if it's the
Yeah.
schools, then they need to
Draw their
hit up,
ability
they
to-
got a bigger budget than we do, I think.
I think their
They get more in my
district
tax
office
than you
has
said.
the ability to do as well.
Yeah,
They just don't wanna drive.
okay, that was easy. That's cool.
Look at you.
We're making lots of friends in this.
It's like, what?
But it's growing pains.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
It is,
We have
it's just
hours.
getting
Just
bigger.
another
There's
word.
staff down there for hours printing stuff.
Okay,
All the things you can do in your little tiny city.
okay, 4.4, Utah legislature 2024 interim schedule and items.
Oh,
So, we received the schedule for the interim sessions, and this is really just an opportunity for council to talk. I read through these and looked at maybe the topics that are probably most impactful to the city. Housing, they're gonna be talking about housing, and that'll probably be forever. There's a list there on some sales tax changes, and I think as a city, we probably wanna watch those and make sure their state's not giving away the money we use to operate, without some way for us to be made whole. There's also some, stuff on impact fees, and then conditional land uses, some changes on conditional land use ordinances. And I think those are the ones I picked up on that we probably wanna at least pay attention to. Our lobbyist sent us this and said, is there anything, so part of this discussion, if there are other things you think, or to what level do you want us engaged on this? Do you think staff need to be down there? Typically, we watch it online if they stream them. If they don't stream it, you might have our lobbyists go. They're not taking input in the same fashion
Really?
at this point. These are just discussions. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed this. I should have thought of it. They take less at this than they do in the regular session, which tells you something. But I do think these are things we should watch for, because these tend to be some of the bigger bills that get introduced
The end.
at the session, are things that have been working through the interim process.
Sometimes at the beginning, right at the beginning.
Sometimes right at the beginning, so. That's just I'm just looking if there's anything specifically that you all saw in there that we should do. Those are the ones that caught my attention. that apply to the city. There's some other stuff in there as a Utah resident. I'm like, why?
I think everything that Mikkel and his thing has, that was the public, but there's some water ones on there, I think are really important that we need to be watching.
Yeah.
There's even some that have active transportation trails and stuff like that in the water, so that's really need to be.
The canals.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, I don't know how much time they'll spend on each of these. Some of these groups have long lists. They have several meetings scheduled, but there's some school safety and security, which we found in this last session. They passed the bill. I don't know if they knew what it meant or how it was going to be implemented. Most of it's on the school district. That's how it was looked at, but a lot of that's still falling to us, so they're talking about an interim, changes, security legislation for gaps. And we probably wanna pay attention to that one so that the gap doesn't mean, hey, city, this is gonna cost too much, you guys pay for this. So, they're, because, again, our argument would be, not all the kids at our schools are from Harriman, so others should be pitching in if that's how it, I'm hoping they don't go that way, but there's a lot in here. And my quick review, I know, Deputy Chief Stromberg looks through these and the police department stay involved and our building department will look through and planning, but if there's anything specific that council sees, and if you don't have it tonight, if you look through it and say, hey, this is one, we'll try and, at least.
Long-term transportation with heartburn for self-assignment.
It's kind of funny that they're talking about student absentees when they took away truancy, but now they're like, should it affect their grades? It's just.
There are some interesting bills in here, so.
But to your point, I don't think we need to send staff down or anything, this is just watch.
We'll try and
No, unless we
pay
get
attention to when these
something.
ones
Our
are.
lobbyists need to be really actively engaged in it.
And I was impressed, they said this the first year they sent, so we make this for watch, as good as what to watch during the interim. Okay, anything else from council?
I'm just curious if in the housing, discussions, if they're going to understand that,
No.
all of their studies that show that housing density increases surrounding property values, that housing density isn't lowering property values and creating more affordable housing.
It's doing the
I
opposite.
just don't understand how there are reports consistently that show that creating density is increasing property values. How is that creating more affordable housing? I don't get that, so.
The other factor in all that too is that is only a portion of what this body has planned for. You can have to plan for more than just houses in our community. And it's never talked about, it's, we're gonna have more housing, we're gonna have more affordable housing, it's like, what about jobs, what about parks, what about services, all
All of the
those kind of
supporting
things
infrastructure
that
and
have to be
services.
there, nothing gets talked about except for you.
Especially when they want to shove all the housing in one area and all of the jobs in another.
Yeah.
There's a lot that they put out there. There's even stuff on property tax. They're looking at how they, so
But that's why I think the league also has to be louder on that. I just don't, that's why I was saying, I don't know that they represent us well enough, because I think that we have to quit going down the rabbit hole of affordable housing. It's like, no, balanced communities. What else do you need in your
Well,
community to support the growth?
Cam will be here on the 12th, so you guys can
Yeah.
tell.
But it's okay to have a discussion about affordable housing.
Yeah.
But they're not ever correlating the actions they take and how it's impacting the affordability of housing.
Right.
It's the look good, feel good, sound good, but they're not focusing on whether or not they're actually doing good.
They have plenty of data.
So we'll,
Increasing our costs and our time and our efforts around it without any accountability for the actual accomplishment of their goal.
if you look through there and see anything else specific, just let me know.
The raw milk one, I'm super
Yeah.
stoked on that.
You super stoked
Yeah.
about that? Okay.
I like my
Driving me
ramen.
nuts, man.
Thank you, everybody. Here we go, 4.5, discussion of the requested fiscal year 2025-2026 public safety budget. Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor. So we do have our chief, deputy chief, and two commanders here tonight, so we are definitely ready to answer any questions that go through your budget, or go through their budget tonight. I did just want to at a high level go over what we as staff were hoping to accomplish tonight and what direction we need. So we'll go through the proposed budgets, so if you can give us any input, if you need any additional items or you need additional information on anything, if there's anything you just vehemently disagree with. And then towards the end, I'd like to have a discussion on property tax philosophy. There were some ideas thrown out at the Truth and Taxation hearing that the HCSEA board had. Staff would just like some clear direction, so we're setting up the budget the way you're expecting it to. So first, just a quick overview of the org chart for police. So as you can see, it is broken up into 3 divisions. There's a total of 48 FTEs. I have combined like police officer and master officers into one category, so I'm not breaking out the two, because there are opportunities for a police officer to move into master officer. I will note, prior years, their FTE count was 49, so when we were redoing the fiscal year 24 budget to make it balanced, we did eliminate that mental health position. It was re-added back with the property tax increase with some strings, that some performance indicators we need to brought back to you before that would be added back. So that hasn't been added back, so that's why it's at 48. High level overview of their budget. So for 25, the expenditure increase request was about 219,000 and change, which is 2%. 26 was a little over $1 million, or 11% increase. We'll go through the capital request that is causing a lot of that increase. I would like to note, the police department, like every other department, went through their line item budgets, and I do have to give them credit for cutting their operating budget. I mean, they did, and it was a wide variety of line items, it wasn't just 1 or 2, so they do get credit for really taking a close look at their budget and trying to get it as lean as possible. The debt service, it's a funny accounting thing we now have to do. There's certain contracts that they have that are considered debt on the city's books, even though it's not like we issued a bond or anything. Because they're long-term contracts, they're considered debt, so that's why they haven't issued a bond or have a capital lease or anything, but they don't have traditional debt. To go into a little bit more detail, so police, we discussed their operating increase, so the personnel increase, and I did detail out the reasons for that in the staff report. It includes the COLA increase that every city employee is proposed to get. Officers that are eligible for a step increase, it does include the step increase. And there are a couple retirement cost increases for the Tier 1 and Tier 2 public safety systems. Long story short, the reason for that is the actuarial studies that URS has done in the past didn't anticipate public safety wages were going to go up so fast. So when it came time to redo the actuarial study, it showed that they needed to increase contributions. So that's that. On the capital side, the only thing that they're requesting is a speed trailer for 22,000, and there's another one in 26. I do want to note, they aren't requesting any vehicles in 25. In 26, they do want to go through the normal evaluation process for their vehicles before they determine if any are eligible for replacement. They want that extra year of use. So they didn't put any requests in waiting to do that evaluation. In 26, so and this is for all the city budgets, I did put in the same COLA for 25 as 26, so that will be something that'll need to be evaluated. I did anticipate a 6% increase in health insurance. This year we were only at 1%, but I put that in as a buffer, and then did anticipate that there will be additional retirement increases. And then, of course, if officers are eligible for their step, I did factor in their step increase. On the operating side, there are a wide range of increases anticipated. We did put in a dispatch increase, which does factor into a lot of that 92,000 increase, because we are expecting an increase from dispatch. And then on 26 on their capital purchases, once again, I mentioned the speed trailer, and then there's some case integration that will need to be done with Versaterm. That is a $60,000 one-time cost. And then the police department is requesting a SWAT vehicle which has an estimated cost of $430,000. As staff, especially the city manager and myself, when we were huddling to determine how we could help pay for this, if the council decided this was agreeable, we did notice they are trending quite a bit under their budget amount for this fiscal year. So using that savings that they will have, and then we do anticipate next year that they will have some additional savings. One thing we do on the personnel side, is we do budget very conservatively on the personnel side, so we make sure all of the personnel are accounted for. We make sure that if we think somebody's gonna become a master officer, if it looks like they're gonna meet those qualifications, we actually make sure that's been put in the budget, even though they might not actually get that. So I feel comfortable on the personnel numbers, and that's a big significant amount of the budget. Moving over to the police and then the property tax, just to show some of those similarities and discussion on that. So as I had mentioned in the in the meeting when you adopted the budget, is we don't know exactly what our property tax increase will be for the year, so I did put in a conservative 3%. So that will generate another $293,000 of revenue, so that's the new growth component of that. As a reminder, during the truth and taxation hearing, the tax increase was restricted to these three items. So first was a vehicle replacement reserve of about $698,000, reinstating the mental health specialist, and then addition of officers to meet demand. So that's 2.4%, there should be a dollar sign there. 26, I did the same 3% increase, so that generates an additional roughly $300,000, $306,000. So this is where something that staff does need some direction on. During the truth and taxation hearing, one of the ideas mentioned was that new growth money should be set aside just for new growth expenses, so that would be new officers, or if we had additional costs such as, just throwing it out there, like if our dispatch went up because our calls went up due to new growth, that revenue should be set aside for that, and that increases just due to inflation and other things need to be covered with a tax increase or other ways. So is that still the direction, or the budget has been set up assuming that new growth money can be used to fund any increase in the budget?
So I think where the confusion comes for us is that was the conversation, but the motion that restricted the money that you raised to these, what we would call new growth. The vehicle replacement is one we need to do, but then you have those two other ones which were kind of new growth. So I guess it's just a little bit, and maybe that is a push, the 92 between what the new growth is. We're just needing some, I guess, firmer direction for you, how you want us to approach this before we come back to you and say, here's when you need to do a truth in taxation.
So I made the motion and I'll at least attempt to clarify for anybody that wasn't clear on it. Cause yeah, we restricted it to those things. The vehicle, in my opinion, the vehicle was to catch up for what we were subsidizing from the general fund, right? And that's an ongoing number, that's not a one-time, right? That's an ongoing thing to go into that specific capital replacement fund. Mental health, same thing, that's an ongoing expense to add that FTE back into the budget. And then the two officers was same thing, ongoing, but subject to the metrics that we called out, right, to look for new hires.
The triggers on the side.
Yeah, the triggers, so that along with that increase, that's looking at the potential need that we were being told is there or close to it, right? And then new growth, you're saying should pay for new growth. If that's the case, then that money needs to be set aside to pay for those positions, again, subject to those triggers, right? So that the problem with most of these kinds of budgets, and we're not just picking on public safety,
this is conversations that I'm having with him every week, is this has to flow over and he's already started to do it to everybody, right? We can't, just because the way that our budget has been done, the way I've seen UFA and everybody's budget has always been done, well, we have some money, let's hire some people. But it's a compounding math problem, and yep, there's money there this year, but now you've used it and we're adding a multiplier to that cost every year. So we need a budget for that, but do we really need that person yet? It's okay to build that fund balance, right, to account for that, the cost that we're gonna incur from that, plus a cushion for that multiplier. So that's probably more than you wanted for that clarification. To me, the big thing is to separate new growth needs and inflation, right? So, and this goes into the city's regular budget as well for personnel. And to me, this is really a heavily personnel-driven thing with COLAs, which, by the way, sorry, I digress, it's one of my questions, what COLA are we using?
3.4%, and I've done the 5-year model similar to what UFA does, if you want me to.
December over December is what
Yeah.
you can-
Yeah, it's a little different than UFA, but I did similar.
Well, we're gonna change what right? So, but we want, so, again, the purpose is, at least for me, my driving purpose is to make sure that this is, what we're doing is sustainable, right? With public safety in particular, I'd say government in general, but public safety in particular, because it's so, staff heavy, right? Is kind of go through, booms and busts as far as our compensation benefits and things, right? When things are good, we try to catch up, because when things are bad, we don't wanna do tax increases and stuff, so there would be huge gaps in between. We don't account for inflation, then we have market increases, and so we went through kind of a dry spell. Now we've caught back up, and we're in danger, and this is industry-wide, right? So, yep, there's a market element to that, and that's a whole different discussion that we're working on. UFA is gonna be a big driver of that. But we'll get too far into that boom, and then revenues and things dry up, and then guess what? We've gotta cut back again. So it's hiring freezes and pay step freezes and all of those painful things come back in. I don't wanna have those painful things, I'd rather smooth it out so we have a more stable, reliable compensation plan for people. To me, that can only happen if we separate those two things. New growth, right, and the triggers to add those expenses. That's what gets out of hand, because when the money's there, we just spend it without the actual triggers and actually needing it at those times. But then we also have that inflation multiplier every single year. I would much rather go back to the public every year, every other year, and ask for a small inflationary increase, because that's what's gonna happen at build out. When we're hopefully all long gone from these chairs and we're built out, there's no more new growth to pay the inflation expense. So I'd much rather do that now and get the public used to it, and we have a much more, I think, manageable, stable growth model. If we do both at the same time, which is what is traditionally done, whatever money is there, we spend it, then that's where we get in kind of what I would call the death spiral, right? Where we're adding inflation onto our already inflated costs because we were growing as the dollars came in versus the needs. It's my very lengthy explanation, but that was at least my intention in proposing that is separating the two. There is something you said, look, if you wanna do it the other way, and you just use the new growth to pay the inflation, at some point, the problem with that is the new growth tapers off, it's not enough to cover the inflationary cost, right? We could keep doing that and then just go back to the public every, say, 4 or 5 years and say, we need a tax increase to add an officer. But then we're still ending up with that math problem at the end, where it doesn't add up.
Could you go back, the slide where we show what the increases are?
Yeah.
Cause that's really your inflation, not even the request, but we showed what the COLAs, cause that's. Well, if you look here, so it's 275,000, so that 3% probably covers that growth, a 3% increase would, right? If you said, so just talking.
Well, it covers the inflation, right?
Covers
You're
that
using the new
inflation.
growth to cover the inflation right now.
Cover the inflation. the next year, our proposal, it's closer to it's 438,000, so that is more, well, and then the 92, so you're at 5, that's more like a 5 or 6% increase on that budget to cover it.
Which is the
But it
problem.
sounds like, and frankly, we won't know till we get there what's going on with those numbers. These are conservative estimates. What I'm hearing from you all is the vehicle money we're going to transfer, right now, we didn't move any of that money into the police budget, it's all stayed in HCC, the safety enforcement. We're gonna move the vehicle money to a reserve for vehicles, so that will stay there. The next year it goes in when we buy, that part's there, so then it's those two personnel pieces.
What was the metric for the mental health
I'm
officer?
trying to remember.
I don't think we have.
I don't know if we created it or
just
just
added
needed to
that.
talk. We brought it back, we use them for things, we haven't,
That one we said, we expect you to add that right away. It was the new
I can't-
officers,
I'm-
we
I'm
want you
trying
to
to
have that
remember-
metric too.
So,
I don't think we had.
so it's based on statistics
why?
of case assignment, right? So we treat the mental health specialist because they're a caseworker the same as we would a detective in investigations, and it's based off of the total call load, the number of victims, the number of people requesting mental health services that they're engaging with. So we, in contrast to what we saw in 2021, 2022, we actually saw about an 18% decrease in mental health related calls into 2023. So we don't know if that's because we didn't have that person. And so the statistics are
Would the
based solely
detectives not
off
take
of
those
control.
calls, or
Sorry, what?
would the detective fill those calls?
Well, so we're tracking the mental health related calls in conjunction, right? So if there's another crime that committed, that case is obviously assigned to a detective, but the mental health caseworker is specifically designed to act as a liaison between our community members and the various mental health resources that are available outside of, the realm of Harriman City. And so there may be, frequently there are cases that are domestic violence related or, other things that a detective is working on from the criminal side, but the mental health caseworker would also be simultaneously working on, similar to what we do with our victim advocate, where there's kind of a shared responsibility there. And so it's based, that metric in the growth silo is based on the number of cases or the number of citizens that person is assisting. And we're tracking it, we track it in the computer system based on a case basis, so they have a code that goes into that case that will tell us how many calls are mental health related, and that's why I said we've seen a decrease in that from 22 to 23. My suspicion is that's probably because we didn't have somebody in that allocation who was paying more close attention to it, and we're making up for the mental health services piece with our victim advocate and our detectives through those other arenas,
so that's one. So in just looking at how this budget, and if we look back at those required inflationary pressures, is that would you want us to do a truth in taxation for that this year? I guess that's really the question, how you want us to do that.
Well, I think we can come back to that question. I predicted that would be this led to. Right.
Well, we
So-
were proposing not to, but if you want to.
Well, so, I mean, should I say it now? But there's one other technical question I have to ask, right? So we have we put in a capital replacement program. Why is this armored vehicle outside of that program? Why is it being asked for now?
And what does
All the
underspend, I mean, there shouldn't be, what
That's
does
what they didn't
unders-
spend from their budget last
Yeah,
year.
but then that should roll into.
So
the-
it
I guess
stays
if you
within
look at
this.
it-
There's money
But if you
there.
look at the next, flip to the next thing again. Like 430,000 would cover the whole personnel increase from that year.
Right.
And so I'm just,
So
because
you're
that,
saying,
if it's an underspend, then put it towards that 6% increase on the personnel rather than, unless you can
Which-
demonstrate we really need it.
So I'll let the police speak to the thing, but that's one way, 'cause essentially that underspend just goes into that balance
Right.
to be able to be
I just hate it
used.
to become
I don't usually,
underspend.
underspend I think is usually it was just, it's a savings, it's right, you didn't,
It's a rollover.
you
from
budgeted
the-
for this
it's-
amount,
It's,
I mean,
it's a rollover from the year
didn't
before
spend.
that you
Yeah,
didn't spend.
usually it's called carryover.
Yeah.
I need to use a better term.
Yeah,
And-
use carryover, underspend makes.
That's a
I feel
carryover,
like you
that's a
think-
carryover
I
from.
just, I
So-
just tell you this,
No,
when
and
we
I
used to
think
be
that's why.
HP, when we were UPD,
Right,
they had to spend their money, even if it got to the end of the year and they had to spend it, you can't just save it, you can spend your money, and we definitely did not want to go down that path to where it's like, you have to spend every time you're allocated.
So at
Even
that
if you
point, I
don't
think there's a
need to.
few answers to the math question of, okay, well, if we wanna stick with what we said we would do, how do we do it? There's a few ways I think that we get there. But what's the answer to the armored vehicle question? Cause I've looked at that and like, where'd that come from? Of all the conversations we've had, it's out of the blue, so is it just because there's money left over these 2
No,
years, we wanna squeeze it
it
in?
is in the so it was put in as we created the CIP, and I will say the first year we did the capital improvement plan, it was projects. We now are bringing the vehicles into that. So it is they did go through that process. The demand or the need for it, I think, was really highlighted with this incident over here, where our vehicle struggled on these streets. It was too big to maneuver through the streets where some of our neighboring cities who have, was it UPD that we brought in
We,
theirs?
we needed to call UPD.
We actually brought in a similar vehicle to what they're proposing because it could maneuver on in those smaller streets. So how we got to those smaller streets, we can have that conversation, but it doesn't get us anywhere. We have a bunch of them. And these probably aren't even the worst ones in the city.
So we're saying we're gonna replace the other one, or this is gonna be in addition to it?
There's different styles.
It's a different tool for a different application, right? And if you remember from our conversation, as we did the debrief on the incident from Keegan Drive, there were some very specific tactical limitations that we were facing because of a lack of maneuverability. It's not to say that our current vehicle doesn't have an application, it certainly does, and certainly saved lives that night. But if you remember, all of the rescues were done using the smaller, more maneuverable vehicle that came in from UPD. The introduction of chemical agents into a residence is also something that the smaller vehicle has the capability to do that the larger one does not. And so and Zach, feel free to jump in, you're the subject matter expert, but it's a different tool for a different application, both of which have a very practical use in a lot of the operations that we're dealing with.
Part of the problem with the vehicle that we secured through the LISA program is that was a mass-produced vehicle for the government and made for a different environment, right? I mean, that's what it was built for, was for not an urban environment. And now trying to replace parts on that, for instance, on the Keegan Drive, we took a lot of fire on that vehicle. We had to replace some glass on that vehicle. It took us about 9 months just to try and find somebody who would do the replacement and come and do it for us here. So the maintenance piece on it, it's difficult. It definitely serves a purpose. Because even in that.
So why would we keep it?
Cause it only cost us like
So,
$15,000.
so although we couldn't carry
Except
out,
when we use it.
well, it's not always our windows that get shot, right? I mean, it happens sometimes, but it was shot several other places too, but it also provided a backstop or basically a bullet trap for all those residents behind it, right? Because of the size of it. The capabilities that Cody mentioned, the ability to breach a door from inside of the vehicle, we can't do that with that vehicle. These have attachments and capabilities to introduce chemical agents, all without putting our guys outside of the armor. Maintenance on them.
It's
These other vehicles.
$5,000 a year, that's pretty steep.
What's that?
$5,000 a year is what's in this stuff.
Yeah, so if you look at even, the technical specs of the vehicle itself, it's not your typical Goodyear run flat tire, right? The wheels and tires on those vehicles are very expensive and they're designed to operate after having been shot or damaged. And so there are definitely some maintenance costs associated with it. The $5,000 was an estimate based off of conversations that we had with other entities that currently have that type of vehicle.
Who else does?
There are 3 in the valley. One is owned by a federal partner. West Valley has a similar vehicle and UPD has the other one. So there's only one in Utah County, one in Davis County, but you're seeing a lot more of them go to this more.
And not to say that we anticipate incidents like Keegan Drive happening, but it was an unfortunate example of the different applications of the various tools, right? Where our operators were contained in the larger pieces of armor, and the smaller piece of armor was then freed up to do those evacuations that may have had to wait until we got into a better position. And so when I say that it's not that one replaces the other, they really are just different tools for different applications. The LISO program is a great federal partnership that we have, and to Councilman Shields, to your point, the reason we acquired that vehicle in such a rapid way was primarily based on cost. It gave us the ability to do some operations for a very inexpensive cost through that LISO program. That program doesn't have vehicles such as this. Those are all purchased through private vendors, through private entities that have taken some of the tactical applications of frankly our military and made them more adaptable to the urban environment in which we work. So
We saw that with the rival platforms though as well, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's another tool that you're gonna outfit your other
Yeah.
police officers with.
Both of them certainly have a very practical application, and that's why we bring it in this. The two weren't connected, the happenstance that the numbers kind of line up, but as we discussed CIP and the need for future assets beyond just the capital projects, this was one of the ones that was at the top of our list because of a couple of the cases that we've been involved in over the last 3 or 4 years where the need for more maneuverability in our urban environment certainly has been highlighted. So again.
What's the call out time for the other 3 units, or what's that look like for?
So it took,
usage?
from the time we requested UPD that day, it was about an hour till we had that piece of equipment here. Cause they've gotta call their guys out, they have to respond, pick it up.
And you were already fully engaged at that point.
And we were still taking fire when we were carrying out those rescues that we needed that vehicle, yes.
I think it's a hard conversation a little bit. It is for me because I feel like part of our primary responsibility is safety, right? And the budget and safety and making sure that we give you guys the tools that you need to have to be effective. But then also our primary responsibility is budget too, right? Is figure out how to spend tax
Don't have money
credits.
for everything.
And so, and I think, well, okay, are we to that level? If there's only 3 in the whole Salt Lake Valley and only 1 in Utah Valley, which is huge, right? They have a massive population. Are we to the point that it's really essential that we have that vehicle now? Or is it something that we can, I hate kicking the can down the road also. Is it really important that we do that, or can that money be spent to satisfy some of these personnel things, and we rely on these partnerships we have with other people to make sure that we can backfill those? Cause I can't, you know what I mean, you might have an incident, but you might go the next 10 years and never have another incident. There's no crystal
hope,
ball on this, right?
And if it is a priority for us, if we decide that that's something that the public should spend money on, then why wouldn't we put it into the capital plan and plan for it over a number of years to slowly get there?
To that, and that's the only thing, so.
'Cause yeah, I mean, no doubt, and I
Yeah.
appreciate answering the questions, like I said in the other meeting, when we ask questions and push back, it's not, hopefully it's not seen as negative, but we need,
to be safe
need to
too.
understand, and I know that when I looked at that, I'm like, I know that there's gonna be reasons for it, I need to know what they are, and there's, no matter what tool you ask for, but you guys are gonna think, there'll never be an argument that there is a use for it.
Yeah.
And a justifiable use for it, but I think the question I'm grappling with this is is kind of what Sherry had pointed out, that is that something that we can shoulder the cost of?
Right now.
So, just a couple of things, and I know that you all agree with this, I'm just pointing it out for public consumption. In these types of situations where we would deploy such an asset, are really the worst situation that we can be involved in, right? We are asking our employees, just as you all pointed out this evening, with the unfortunate incident that happened in Santa Quin, we are asking our employees to inject themselves into situations where they very could well lose their life. And I believe, and I know the chief believes as well, that we have an obligation to provide them with the very best tools possible when that happens, to put themselves in the line of fire between a bad actor and our citizens to protect our communities. So that would be my plug for that. The other conversation piece really is, we left that in the budget as we're talking. We understand that we're all under budgetary constraints, and Nathan's done a really good job of making sure that our focus as department heads has been on where can we look for opportunities to maximize efficiency. This is one that we felt very passionate about, and if the conversation is, the 438 and 26 is something we're concerned about, we would prefer to look to save that in other areas, but it also factors into the conversation that we're having right now, where most of that 438 is inflationary, where the capital request for the SWAT vehicle is an operations piece. And so if we really are intending to keep those two separate, then the one doesn't necessarily pay for the other. And at the end of the day, that's your decision, and we'll follow whatever direction is given by the council. But leaving that in, again, was a conscious decision on our part. We do believe there's a practical need for it. Our SWAT team, I'll tell you, is the best SWAT team in the state. We are constantly fielding requests from other agencies to conduct or at least assist in operations because of the caliber and quality of operators that we have. And so the more we're out operating in those instances, unfortunately, the more propensity there is for something bad to happen. And we do have an obligation to provide our employees with the best equipment we can.
Which is fantastic, but that also speaks to Sherry's point of, it's great, our people are fantastic, but are we filling a need for others?
Well, only in the sense of the conversation regarding mutual aid, right? So we're not actively going out and seeking opportunities to operate in other areas. When we talk about
We're being
mutual
called
aid,
because we have the assets, if we pay for this, it's going to be asked for and more in other
Part
areas.
of what I was gonna say is there's several agencies out there right now that are going through this same process or same proposal with their cities. You're seeing a swing going away from those less mobile style vehicles to this because everybody's understanding in these environments, especially in some of these tactically challenging environments, right?
This talk to the same legislature people.
Right, this is the need, this type of vehicle is the need. And like I said, it goes back to there's a ton of different capabilities that this type of machine can do versus what we have.
So, sorry, I
That's not a
apologize.
bad,
Can I ask
sorry,
a
what you
question?
just said, maybe we should talk to the legislature. Is there a way, I wonder if that would make more sense if there is like regional assets like that, cause we would share like with Riverton, South Jordan, our closest neighbors.
and that was what I was gonna say. When we talk about our area of operation, keep in mind that based on our partnership that we have in South Valley right now with our SWAT team, it's not just us. It's
Yeah.
us, Riverton, South Jordan, and Draper now. And so this is an asset that would be utilized in all
Would it be a
four
cost
cities
share?
primarily.
That's where I was gonna go. Is there an opportunity for a cost share?
Well, and the cost sharing under the terms of the agreement is usually in other areas. Like, so if we purchase an armored vehicle right now, South Jordan is primarily
Purchasing
running the drone
drones.
program, right? So we don't have to spend money on that drone program for the SWAT deployments because South Jordan runs that program. And so when we talk about our shared resources in the South Valley, that's how we balance the books. Is we will focus on the armored vehicle, South Jordan focuses on the drones, Riverton chips in a different piece to that, Draper brings something else to the table. It may be, I know that Draper right now is one of those agencies that has also proposed in their budget a similar type vehicle. And so to have one in our South Valley SWAT team on the west side and the east side would be extremely beneficial to our operations.
You're
So-
going to see a shift away as those larger MRAPs age out. They're just gonna give them back to the federal government because they're really not designed for what we need them to.
They're not designed for-
So.
And
So-
keep in mind that we don't own that asset. We are allowed to use it under a lease program, but if the federal government picks up the phone tomorrow and calls us and says we want it back, we have to give it back to them, and then we have no
They have to
armor,
pay us back
so,
to the cool paint job.
I don't even know if they.
So-
and transport.
There's definitely a use for it, right, and even a need for it. It's just how can we pay for it and everything else?
Yep.
Right, so
I might,
for me, when I look at math problem, the problem, there's several problems I have with this. With that one in particular, in relation to the other problems, the other question that's being posed, I'm looking at that going, I'm having a hard time not getting upset with how this is being done. Right? So in the very first paragraph, Staff would like direction on the council's property tax philosophy for the police department during the HCC Truth and Taxation hearing. The board discussed restricting new growth property tax for new growth expenditures. The staff would like direction on this preferred philosophy. The budget had been prepared assuming new growth revenue could be used for general purposes. So we said we want it this direction. And right in the opening paragraph, we ignored that. This is what we want to do. So what I would have preferred to see is, look, this is the direction you gave us. This is a budget prepared based on that. But this is what we're seeing and the reasons that we would like these other things considered. I'm having a hard time.
So I wanna
with that.
respond to that, because I think one of the challenges came in that HCC meeting. There was a lot of discussion about when you said that, but then the motion was made different than the conversation.
We've had a whole year to talk about it.
I know, well, we've been wrestling with this, saying, okay, so that's what the purpose of tonight is. And tell us how you want us to do it. If you want us to do it
But
differently, in the meantime,
I understand the conundrum, but there's been a year to talk about it, and it's at the 11th hour. Okay, what do you want to do about it? And if you don't let us do it the way we want to, there's going to be a shortfall. Right? And part of that shortfall is asking for a $500,000 piece of equipment using the quote savings that we really should have in there that we should be able to use towards the inflationary costs. That's the way we want the budget to run, right? So that we have that cushion each year.
so I guess that's the purpose of tonight. If you wanna shift it out, if you wanna do something, then that's what we're looking for.
So my preference, I'll just say my opinion is one, I would definitely like to shift towards the budget that we proposed and separating growth and inflation. Long term, that's a better path to sustainability. If we keep going.
Growth goes away, inflation stays, is that your point?
And it compounds. If the money's in the budget, it gets used, right? And then we have the inflation compounding on the inflation that was used, and it's not sustainable that way. If we don't, I can be persuaded the other way, but then we have to have other restrictions as well. If you're gonna use growth money now, we have other restrictions going forward. For this year, where we're trying to make this change, and I have no problem pursuing this piece of equipment, but to try to shove it into this budget when we're trying to change and figure the rest out, I think is too much. I would much rather leave it out, use those savings to help fund the difference in the inflation for this year, so we can work on a budget for the following years.
That just contradicts
It
what you
does-
said though, cause you're using the operation money to pay for inflation now, out of the past year's budget, that they didn't.
Yeah, no,
use.
that's what I wanna do going forward. There should be an under expend every year. We shouldn't be spending every single dollar. There should be an amount. It's what we do with UFA. It's refund to the member fee. Right? We should be able to look at this next
So how does
year.
operations pay, how do you separate operations, and if they undersave or underspend, you're using the operation funds to
We
pay
can-
for inflation?
We're looking at that, where you can use that into next year's number. Okay, this next year, we're proposing a COLA, we're proposing market adjustments, we're proposing whatever. And those are funds that we can use, right? Whether it's for a piece of equipment or otherwise, it can be used for any of those things.
Were
I'm
you
saying
proposing
for-
this year to
I'm
use
saying
it
for
for
this
inflation?
year, yeah, we're trying to make a big change in how we're operating.
Well, why don't you start now?
Because we don't have enough money to do it all.
But then from the last truth and taxation, we talked about going back and getting another 2% or 3%.
Well, that's the question. If you want to have
That was what was
everything,
discussed a year
if you
ago.
wanna have everything, then we need to tell them we need to go and ask for another couple percent this year again.
Okay.
Right? And the problem I have with that is that the budget has not been set up to separate those yet. So I'd much rather use that money for this year and prepare a budget next year
For
that accounts for
25s.
those. Yeah.
So, so I think, so it's clear for all of us, we'll use the word inflation, and that will include the COLA and everything that just, anything that increases off the base from the year before, that'll be inflation. Growth is what we're seeing just from new growth in the system, and that would be hiring new employees or new program, whatever your.
Subject to those
creating.
metrics, and if the metrics don't fit and we don't have to use that money, we can use it
So-
for other things.
So would this, help me understand, would this vehicle be, it's not inflation, so would it be under?
It should be in the capital replace them.
Well, so it would be,
Was or was.
so it's in the CIP. It just happens to be in the second year of this budget, you could slide it out, but I'm trying to figure out how I,
Show me
Which
a plan
revenue-
of how we get there and provide all the other vehicles, et cetera, that are contemplated in there. The way, what we're doing here is the same way we've always done it, okay, we have this much money and here's all the stuff we want.
Okay.
Let's get it and we'll worry about the next tax increase.
Is there a full list of what you guys requested before Nathan shut it down? And you guys nitpicked it through?
And I'm open to any, dialogue and any
Yeah.
suggestions, any way you want to try to separate things. But the
So-
only way we will ever be sustainable and control some of those costs is to separate them.
so I will say they've done a really good job with the vehicles right now, we're gonna push that 670 or whatever over into a thing for future vehicle purchases, cause we're trying to get more use, they're doing a good job moving vehicles around, so they're not getting.
Can we put that in an
Is
interest
that-
bearing account or anything?
Yeah.
No,
It is, it'll get.
it'll earn
Yeah,
interest.
something.
in the fund.
So I want you guys to have that
Yeah.
piece of equipment, but in a way that we've planned for it, not there's some extra money we wanna do with it.
Well, and exactly what you're discussing is actually the reason why it's in the 26 budget. When we initially proposed it, because of the need and some of the things that have happened recently, we actually put it in the 25 budget. After some discussion with Nathan and Kyle because of the amount and because we still hadn't had this clear direction of what we wanna do in the district yet. That's why it was moved to the 26 budget, where if we get to next June and it doesn't look like, or the growth goes a different way or whatever, that we have the ability to amend that and push it to 27 rather than, the other thing that's important to recognize is that, these vehicles, because they are specially built, have about a 12-month build-out process. So if we're intending to fund it in 26, we would actually have to place the order in 25. So that's another thing to consider, that once we pull the trigger on that, there's
But
about a year
again,
delay on it.
those are all more reasons why, for me, we have to decide on our plan and what our budget process is going to be and then fit it into it instead of putting it first and say, we'll figure the rest out.
And it's a 15-year vehicle, realistically, it's like a fire engine, it doesn't get a ton of miles, it'll eventually age out, things will start breaking on it just because of age and you'll replace it. So what I'm hearing, you would prefer us to figure out, essentially amortizing that like we've done with the trucks and saying this is what we think we would put into it, 'cause if we buy it, we should be planning to replace it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's the carryover or the under for last year coming over? Or this?
We won't know till June 30, but.
Right, we won't know till September, when
So-
we have the numbers finally done.
I have a question about that. Is the underspend a measure of what the budget is versus the revenue that comes in? Or is it a measure of this is the budget and this is what we actually spent?
So
Yes.
we're actively reducing spending based on the current, at the direction of our city manager, based on the current fiscal situation of the city. So where we had certain money budgeted for specialized trainings and other things, we're looking at what is absolutely baseline necessary and we are pushing everything else off. So when we say the underspend or not being spent, those are budget items that we are actively choosing or intentionally choosing not to expend in the
understood.
current budget.
I guess, but I just wanna make
Understood,
sure is,
unappreciated.
yeah, like, again, my question is more, if revenue increases $1 million, does the budget automatically increase $1 million?
No.
Okay,
Everything's zero-based budgeting, so
Okay,
we start from
just-
scratch every year and Kyle and Nathan
Okay,
go
just wanna
through that
make sure of that.
exercise.
okay. Second thing is, you're suggesting that the cost of this new vehicle can be paid for in the savings from that you're recognizing from these other cost-cutting measures that you're doing?
Could be. It's a potential funding source, is
Okay.
what we've discussed.
We won't know.
From 24, 25, and then.
Okay. The 1.1% tax increase that we authorized for the payment of a mental health specialist, that $89,000 has not been spent,
Correct.
because we haven't hired that person. the $192,000 that we allocated for new officers to meet demand has not been spent.
It's not in there underspend though, because it hasn't been transferred.
Okay, got it.
It's still sitting in HCC.
Right, so there's this $290,000 or whatever it is for personnel that we made a tax increase for that hasn't been spent. And based on a conversation I had with Nathan, it may not need to be spent for some time. There's not currently a forecasted need for an additional officer next year, or maybe even the year after, based on our
So based on our metrics and triggers from the growth model discussion that was part of the tax increase last year and that we discussed, we really have one trigger in all of our silos that we believe is met right now, and it's based on our geographical response times. So one of our metrics is priority one call response time, which we've empirically shown can be done in 6 minutes or less in the city. We're averaging just over 8 minutes right now. So that's the one trigger that we have that we could say would be met and qualify for a discussion of adding additional allocations. Now, we've also discussed where those are placed, and we can articulate an increasing need probably for what we're our peak call hours, right? That's where most of our demand happens. The 50% of our calls come in between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m., which is very common across the country in police departments. So if you look at allocations, that's the one metric that has met a trigger that would qualify for discussion. So if you say, is there a need? Yes. Is there an urgent, immediate need? No.
What's the best way to rectify that or solve that issue?
Which
From
the
call
response
time?
times,
Yeah.
it's really, we're an interesting geographical puzzle piece
Yeah, take the.
with not a lot of east-west access, as you're all aware, so that impacts us as much as it does everybody else.
I'd like to finish my questions here, so. The 3.3 or 3.5% of tax increase that we approved last year is just going to sit in an account right now and isn't being allocated towards anything.
Correct.
So if I can interject in that, right? So subject to the metrics, right? So when it's triggered, then that money is there to be used for those when that trigger is hit. We don't have to wait for the following budget year, et cetera. And while it's there growing, right, we're adding that inflationary issue. If it turns out that we don't hit those metrics in the time period that we had thought, then yep, that's money that we can use towards other things or inflation, right? If we budget
I don't think because you keep on saying you wanna use money for operations and operations, that's what we raise taxes for operations.
Teddy, my
not
point is
inflation, though.
that if we budget properly, there will be extra money that you can allocate to whatever you want.
No, cause we have strings tied to that and we have to hit the metrics.
Well-
That was what the motion said, and that's what you told the public. Now, you can't go back in a year or two and say, oh, no, we gave you a 15 or 12% tax increase, now we're gonna use it for inflation, whatever we want to.
I disagree.
So
Sorry, Chief.
there's a difference between what the tax increase, the revenue that was created by the tax increase, we put some restrictions on. We did not restrict any of the other funds that are coming without the tax increase, okay? With the exception of growth in revenue that comes from new growth, we wanted that to be applied to the expenses related to new growth, i.e. adding a new officer. I think an argument could be made that it could be adding new equipment, potentially.
Or
Okay.
building,
Or
or whatever.
right, okay. So I think that there's two different things, right? There's the amount that they've been collecting, and then there is the tax increase that we approved and what to do with those funds, okay? So I think that your argument that if you spend less than you needed over here, we haven't restricted that in any way. That can be allocated for, whatever, needs to be done there. My questions are about this additional 12.2% that we approved and how that's being allocated. So the 8.7% for the vehicle fleet replacement, the almost $700,000. that is gonna go into a fund. And that fund is going to be used to purchase and replace vehicles over time. It may not all be spent at once, but eventually that money is gonna be cycled through over the years in the acquisition and disposition of.
Attempting to amortize the fleet, so we were doing
It
this.
goes through your same thing like
smoother.
Monty fleet replacement system, right?
Right,
Yeah,
completely.
cool.
The area where I wanna focus my questions here is this additional 3.5% that we approved in a tax increase, that we said we wanted to reserve for mental health specialist and a new officer to meet demand. By not spending that money, we now have a fund balance, if you will, in those areas. I think there's two arguments to be made. One is, based on the feedback that we gave and the direction we gave in that meeting, that money should be reserved specifically for those and build up a fund balance until those things are needed. And then that fund balance would help offset equipment, COLA, whatever, for those people over time. Right. The other argument is that 3.5% was not used in the last year and is not necessarily going to be used in the next year. And so we have approximately, $550,000 that's going to be sitting in a fund balance. And now we're talking about saying we want to go back and do a truth and taxation hearing to raise taxes again to pay for cost of living increases when we have a fund balance of money that's not being used. And this is where the philosophical issue comes in, right? Do we go ahead and make an increase to pay for the inflationary COLA, essentially, right? And then keep this money aside for who knows how long? I mean, what if it's 6 years, right? And there's $1.5 million in there. Do we still keep having annual increases for cost of living? I mean, are we gonna be having a truth and taxation with a 3 or 4% increase every single year? That's one way to do it. Or do we say, we have money that's available, it's not currently allocated, we can use that to pay for the cost increase, but now, next year, we don't have the money for the officers that we told the people that we were increasing the taxes for, right? This is why I think I share some of Jared's frustration about the way that the budget was prepared and proposed, was that this is assuming that we were gonna change our mind about how money's used, not assuming that we meant what we said, and the budget should have been submitted with a shortage, and that we would need a tax increase to pay for that additional.
So I think in our defense, if you listen to that meeting, there's a lot of this conversation, and then the motion's made differently.
Yeah,
It was based off that, and so
but again,
we're sitting here going,
if that question,
okay.
if there was a question about that, I would agree. There's been a year to bring that subject up with the council and ask for
Fair
clarification
point. We
prior
should
to
have done
this
that.
moment, okay? We've got, a public hearing in a couple weeks, and we've gotta have this, and now we're saying now we're faced with a philosophical question that we could have been debating for a year, that we now have a very short period of time to make a decision on. So that's why I'm expressing the frustration about it. I'm not saying that we didn't create some confusion somewhere. I'm just frustrated that at this moment is when the question is brought up. And again, that's not necessarily, I'm not saying it's wrong to ask the question, the timing of it is where I have a concern. So at this point, I'm gonna suggest, I would love to see saying, here's where we're at. If we don't use any of the new growth money or we don't use anything else to pay for this, where we need to be. I think that we could say that the additional 300,000 each year that's coming in new growth could be allocated to pay for those costs right now. But because we've had the additional money allocated to get a new officer. The problem that I have is somewhere along the line, as Jared rightly points out, there's gonna be a math problem that, what if there's interest rates drop 5% and we're down to 3% interest rates again and building goes crazy and we're doing 3,000 building permits a year again, all of a sudden we need to hire 5 officers and we've taken money that was supposed to be set aside as new growth and we've now allocated that towards COLA increases and there's no money and we have to do a 15 or 20% increase. I think that's what we philosophically are trying to avoid, are large increases less frequent rather than small increases more frequently.
So if we were to take the 292, 950 and restrict that, but then free up, and I guess that's where, cause when we did the increase last year, we just brought ourselves even.
Yeah,
We didn't deal
And
with,
that's what we knew.
we
We knew
didn't
that.
deal with the inflation, so here we are with inflation, it's a lot less than it was last year. But I guess that's what we're trying to figure out, how do we cover this, cause that 292, if you go back and look at just what a 3%, because of the steps and we have young officers who have the ability to grow, it's costing us, well, in this one, you could get the 275. And I will say, part of that underspend is they went through and they really trimmed their budget, so you won't see as big of underspends in the future because
Sure.
we've been a little bit tighter. That second year, the 438 is a very conservative on the high side, we think. We don't know, but again.
Which I agree with being conservative.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in this year, you could say, well, that money that we already set aside for the mental health, if we just wanted to use, because it was an increase, it's
So there's-
confusing because the conversation was, we're gonna do these kinds of truth in taxations to cover inflation. That was most of the conversation, then at the end, all
I
of a sudden,
don't
the
want
vote
to
was
be
like,
lying
ah.
to the public.
I
That's
know.
where I don't wanna be. We clearly articulated why we chose that percent of increase over other options that were presented. That we needed money for a new officer, we needed money for this mental health resource, and a year later, we haven't used those.
Not hired, well, the
haven't
officer,
hired.
we knew we weren't going, even then, we were saying, we're not sure, cause
Right.
originally.
I understand, but
we-
the
we
mental
gave
health
multiple-
officer I thought we needed, and now we haven't hired that one either. In my mind, so I'm gonna make the argument, we should have made the tax increase smaller, because we didn't need the money.
I disagree with that. They were given directive outside of the meeting to not hire anybody. And so
Why-
they've been
why
held
would
hostage
we-
for the last year. And that could be discussed
I
on
don't
other meetings.
recall giving direction not to hire a person that we increased taxes to pay for.
Well, somebody did.
Well, now, only in this budget did we say no new hires. I don't think we've triggered, and frankly, I can't recall any conversations we had about mental health specialists, cause I moved on to other budgets. But those are fair points. Again, there was this huge philosophical conversation, and then we got to the motion and they went back and said, we'll use these percentages, but that was bringing us level. We never talked about, and throughout the meeting was, we're gonna do these increases to cover inflation, we want new growth to cover new growth. But we didn't do that, so we're trying to figure out, how do I cover this inflation this year, unless you wanna go to a truth in taxation? I philosophically don't think we should when we're sitting on money and we know we're not going to hire this year. Well, that money will be there next year, if we hire, we can do that. I guess that's my take, I struggle going to the public and say, I need you to give me more money, when I have money sitting here that would cover that, but.
I think we will all agree with you with that. So I'm gonna try to boil this down to a couple of decisions that are before us, right? So, number one, I'll just respond to Teddy, because he's referring to me in my motion. I said that we want that 2.4% go to new officers, but only hire them when we meet the metrics that we've talked about. That's reasonable, that's not telling them don't hire anyone. That's saying use that money when it needs to be used, don't use it just because we put it there,
And they've done that.
right?
They followed that directive.
Conversation we just had just was counter to that. So that, I'll just say that part regarding that one issue.
Have
The
you
deci-
hired anybody from that new money?
The decision in front of us, have we met the metrics to hire
No.
them?
We met 1/3 of the metrics, or one part of the metrics was all.
So the decision before us is, okay, this is, the math problem that is in front of us is, yep, we've put that money aside for those reasons that we said we would use it for. we can come back to the, do we need a mental health specialist or not? I appreciate that. If we didn't need him, please don't hire him, right? And we can go back, the public would be great with us coming back to them and said, yep, we raised your taxes for this purpose. As it turned out, situations changed after, right, post-COVID, whatever this, all the things that you talked about, there isn't a need for that anymore. We're gonna reposition that, and that won't be in the next tax increase. I think that's a conversation I can have with the public and say, we saved you money. That's great. Same thing if we don't need officers, we're going to need them. I just don't wanna spend the public's money until we need them, right? And that's what I'm getting at with having metrics, whether it's police or any other position, is that just because we have the money, we go and hire them, and we have that compounding math problem start too soon, right? The decision in front of us is, okay, I think there's 2 or 3 major parts to the decision in front of us. We didn't account for it that way for whatever reason. We need to account for the planned increases, right? And we need to decide if we want to add this piece of equipment over this 2 budget years. Those are the 2 asks in the budget, right? Above what we're already paying for. So how do we pay for, I think we need to pay our people, that's part of the inflation issue. So the question there is, how do we pay for the inflation? Do we pay for it by going to the public and asking for more taxes this year, saying it's for those COLA increases, because that's what it's for? Or do we use the underexpend? Kudos, guys, for saving that money, and part of what we're wanting to spend on that piece of equipment to cover that and create a plan going forward that incorporates them. That's my preference. Or do we say, will we have that money this year? Let's pay for those things. We're still even, and then we can have this philosophical discussion for next year's budget. So kind of 2 decisions. Do we proceed as is directed here, which basically uses all the money this year, and then we have next year to decide on that, but that still leaves the piece of equipment in limbo. When we have that little bit of extra money, do we want to add to that? Because it's half this year and half next is what we're proposing to pay for it. So we have a little bit of wiggle room there. But then we still have to have the inflation question going forward. We use the new growth money. That's the thing, if you use new growth money this year for whatever it is, to pay for COLA costs or to pay for equipment, we still use that new growth money, and now you don't have that for that next piece of equipment, that next officer, that next whatever it is. That there is a day of reckoning that comes with that. So all I'm asking for is that we have that day of reckoning discussion and build it into our budget. Whether, can we do it in 2 weeks? Not really, we have to decide how do we wanna do this year's.
So the 978 will stay, right? We have 978 this year, we'll get 978 next year
That's
as
separate, that's
well,
for, yeah.
right? Those are those reserved almost 700,000 is going to vehicles, so that's every year, that's moving over towards vehicles.
Yeah, that's great.
But when you say vehicles, so this vehicle was not in the vehicle plan? Because I thought you said it was.
When we created this
It's in
number,
the CIP.
this was, I believe at that time, it was just the fleet. I would have to ask Trevor if we probably didn't include the big armor piece
We did not.
because it was free.
But
so-
I know, that one was free, but you never
When-
considered adding this other, this is a new add to your vehicle
So
plan.
when that 697 number was created and in discussions with Trevor again, that was based on the fleet replacement
Yeah, I
costs.
think it's those
And
are
so
all
this
the-
vehicle was not contemplated in that plan because that plan was to cover what do we anticipate reasonably are our fleet replacement costs for the current fleet that we own today.
Yeah, and that's,
Yeah, this
and
year.
I think we've done a pretty reasonable guesstimate around that number for the fleet, and that's great. And look, if there's savings there, that's awesome, right? If we didn't budget enough, we'll have to make adjustments too.
And we know there will be at least some savings because again, we have no plans to purchase any vehicles
Yeah,
in
you're extending them
25
for a year.
because
Yeah, yeah,
you guys gave us the allowance to go purchase extra vehicles, essentially vehicles that we did have a need for, an anticipated need for, we purchased early. And so our fleet right now is in a pretty good place where we're asset rich. And so we have no intention to purchase vehicles in 25, which allows a little bit of savings there.
A lot of this is to smooth that out over the
Right,
years, so we can do that.
So that we don't get hit with $1,500,000, $1,800,000
Yeah.
But
fleet.
Sherry's question
cost
is,
in
is
1
this,
year.
is this vehicle included in that?
It was not in that
It
replacement.
would not have been in that number when we did the increase, because frankly, we hadn't had the incident yet when we did all this.
It wasn't contemplated when we were having
So-
that
But it
discussion
will
last
be
summer.
going forward, right,
We-
because
we
it- you
would
might have
anticipate-
to anticipate replacing
So
that.
it will have to be
I
included.
just wanna say, I appreciate you taking the time to answer the questions. I'm trying to be meticulous about the discussion I'm having. At this point, I'd like to propose a couple of recommendations. Number one is that the money that we did not spend on hiring those new resources this year, that we use those funds to cover the cost of, the increased costs for this year. Or for this next budget year.
We flipped the one slide.
That's the
That's not what you were saying.
88 and the
No,
192.
and again, that's not what he's saying, this is what I'm saying, right?
I know, I'm just making sure, I'm trying to follow the,
Is the mental health
So I'm
specialist
open
and the
to-
officer
I know,
required to
I'm
meet
just
the
trying to
man?
understand.
We didn't hire those, that's money that we set aside for salaries, right? Because we didn't use it for those this year, we can use it to pay for the cost increases. If again, next year, we still haven't hired those people, we could use that money again for that. But we should be accounting for the fact that this money is specifically to hire those people. So if we have to hire them, we won't have the money to pay for additional increases. It will cause our tax increase to be higher, right? So we need to be aware of that. But that's what I would suggest this year. The second thing I would suggest is that the new growth money that we are getting, the 292,950, that as this budget is saying, that's gonna be allocated for some costs as well. So if that is to pay for vehicle cost, that's fine. If that's to offset the COLA costs, that's fine too. For this 2025 budget. I think what we need to do then is when we're looking at the second half of that budget, the 2026 budget, that we need to sit down and really do the budget the way that we intended. And if that means that we need a COLA increase with the truth in taxation, that we do it.
So
Right.
if we look at the 2025 budget, the 275, the increase, essentially that 280 essentially would cover everything that they're proposing. So you wouldn't need to take any of the new
New
growth
growth.
money
Okay, and that's
to deal
fine
with
too.
that. Do you want that then restricted?
Yeah, I'd like the new growth money to stay
Yeah.
in a new growth fund because it's the same reason we're doing the vehicle replacement fund.
And
It's
that's
to
fine.
smooth out those costs over time, that if suddenly we need to hire 2 or 3 officers at a time because of massive growth or expansion, we've got the funds to do that without having to do a tax
And it's
increase.
not just new officers, but are you gonna need a satellite station anywhere?
Yeah, you're operating.
Yes,
I mean,
that kind of stuff
those
too,
kind
right,
of
yeah.
things.
That's all contemplated in the capital improvement plan
Yeah, but some of that
that's
stuff is because
it's a
of new
related
growth,
discussion.
and so that new growth, that money's gonna have to keep building to pay for that kind of stuff,
Agree.
it's gonna be expensive.
It's a fund to help smooth out
Yeah.
costs over time. That's part of the discussion we had was to try and say, we wanna get us to a break-even budget kind of a situation, like we knew that wasn't gonna take care of things for long.
Yeah.
Okay, but to have a better philosophy going forward, that we were creating some funds that would anticipate future needs, right? That we're trying to get ahead of it a little bit, but inflation's gonna continue to erode that. The truth in taxation of small, annual tax increases, I mean, a 3 or 4% increase is like $1 a month for an average person, right? It's not gonna break budgets. When we come back and say, hey, we've gotta come up with, $100 a year or $200 a year because there's a massive change, that starts to really impact people's finances, and I don't wanna do that. So anyway, that's what, my recommendation would be is if that,
So the mental health and the officer money can go towards the increase.
yeah, for,
and then
for,
new
for this
growth
year, and then
stays.
let's figure out what we need to do.
So
for the
from,
next year.
from a philosophical point of view on the inflation piece, I think that fits in the construct, right? Because we did a tax increase to catch up on inflation and everything that we talked about. And yeah, we restricted the funds. The purpose of restricting the funds is so that if it gets transferred into that account, it's like my checking account. If that money's in there on the weekend, it's getting spent, right? There's stuff that we can use and that we need for it. But if part of my planning, right, is part of that deposit every month, some of it gets put into these side funds, which is not in that fund to spend, right? Anticipating those future needs. That's the idea of the separating the new growth money. For the three positions, I think that makes good sense, Steve, because I can go to the taxpayers and say, yes, we increased your taxes for those positions, which, because we've done a good job, we don't need to hire them and spend that money. So we can use it for the inflation piece instead of raising your taxes again,
Right.
right? Cause it is
It
for the
can-
same thing, and that
it's what
money
he's
is,
saying. There's money sitting there, we're not gonna raise your taxes, we're gonna spend that money instead, right?
and next year, that money is there again to hire those people if needed, and we have to have the same discussion of do we need to do an inflationary increase? But we have to tackle, so same thing I told UFA is, look, we can get through this budget, but there's a couple of these structural things that we have to tackle early, August, September, so we're not doing this again.
So I'm thinking, we'll have our final numbers for this 24 budget late September, so probably in early October, we could have a work session where we talk about HCC and say, well,
That would be,
here's the underspend, how do we want to move it forward?
And that goes for all the budgets, that's the preferred method is on the
honestly,
carryover.
I'm inclined to say underspend, if that's the word we're gonna use for that.
Say carry.
We're gonna use
Carryover, okay, carryover,
Carry over.
if there's a surplus, from, this is what we budgeted and this is what they spent, and there's a delta there. That money we shouldn't say, hey, you need to spend that in order to get it, we'll roll that over to the next year, and that's some discretionary funds to be used for all kinds of things, right? If that's an offset of COLA, if that's an offset of purchasing a new vehicle, if that's whatever, I'm okay with that, that's great, they should be applauded for saving that money, and then that money shouldn't be, we're gonna take it away from your budget next year, that kind of thing, right? I think we just keep
Well, and
letting
that's-
them.
It stays in their fund.
Yeah.
To be
keep it in
fair,
the
I think
fund
that's
to
really
be
kind of
part.
where they're coming from, is
Yeah.
looking at it that way. The problem is, the disconnect for us is, that's not how we plan to do it, right? And it might wash out the same way, but we're trying to change the structure of how we're arriving at those decisions. Rather than saying, yeah, fantastic, save that money and we can use it for that and move it up in the process, it's great, but it's moving that decision ahead of the others that we're trying.
I just need to know that that's at least three of you,
And that was just my
because
proposal.
that was our challenge in I think in the meeting is there were a lot of voices, but then the vote was so different from the conversation that it leaves us kind of in a box, and I apologize, we should have had this conversation earlier.
Steve, I'll second that, I like that solution, like I said, there's that decision to be made now, what we do with this budget. But as long as we fix the structural problem and that clear direction early in the process, and we're not sitting in the same boat
So-
next year.
But let me ask, is the money for the mental health specialist and the officers that we allocated, is that enough to take care of any
19.
budget
So-
issues this year, or is it?
25's covered with that.
But this is-
26, I have a proposal that I'd like to get some clarification on. Cause you have to pass both years
Yeah, that's what I
right
was
now.
gonna say, we're
Yeah,
gonna
that's what I'm
tackle
saying, right,
both.
we gotta pass both
What
now,
my
but,
proposal would be is I will do the 26 budget as we've discussed, it will show a deficit, we will have to come back to do a budget amendment in 26. But then that way, I'm not,
And part of that will be the vehicle discussion, right?
so it will show a deficit for 26, but the assumption is we will come back.
So
And you're anticipated buying it though, when?
So
Ordering it.
the fund, the actual purchase would happen in 26, but because there's such a long lead out in the build time, we would have to place an order essentially committing the city to spend those funds in 25. And so that's the conversation, is if you're comfortable with that, October-ish, we probably have to have that decision
so it's
relatively
like, honestly,
solidified.
I don't want to be arguing with the subject matter experts over the need of what's gonna protect our officers.
I'll lose every time.
Right, I don't wanna ever be in that conversation.
It's a matter of how and when we pay
Yeah.
for it, right?
I'm trusting that you are making wise decisions and you're asking for this because it is a need that is going to save lives, is going to protect our officers. It's a reasonable expense for the benefit that it's bringing to our police force. So I'm not gonna get into a debate with you about that. What I do wanna have a debate is how we pay for it, right? What's the proper way for us to look at this? Do we need to include it in the vehicle plan? Is it part of a fleet replacement thing? I mean, we don't have to have that discussion tonight, but it is a discussion we need to have.
And it's an important discussion, and in your defense, this is the first time we've ever had that discussion, because we've never made this level of purchase within the HCC before. And so it's important to set the stage for what happens in the future, because this won't be the only one probably that we'll have to buy.
That's probably why we were all like sticker shocked a little.
Yeah.
Wait, what
For
is
sure.
this? What is this?
They used to be a lot cheaper.
Let me, I just ask one, is there, this is separate, are there grants, are there things we could go after to help to improve I mean, if there's not, that's fine, I'm just saying, are there?
I think that's what we have, is the one, the program that
Pretty
exists
sure there's
gives
some
you the
county
MRAPs.
funds that we've been talking about
So the
Shared
county and the
service
state,
for quite a while.
yeah,
The shared
typically the state does not like to allocate grant funding for this type of an expense. If they're gonna award us grants, a lot of it has to do with public outreach efforts like highway safety, click it or take it, that type of stuff. They don't like to fund, they do fund equipment for us that we get grant money for, such as body cameras and dash cameras, but they're specifically tied to like alcohol enforcement, DUI enforcement, that type of thing. They don't typically like to allocate grant money for expenditures.
Which makes sense.
Is there a way to, speak of that, I mean, is there a way to go to the county? Can we lobby our county council people to, I mean, if
Sure.
there's money going
The
to the county.
county wants to give us money, we're all.
I'm just saying they're putting it
Yeah.
into a shared services right now, if there's another need for, I think the argument could be made, there's a need for a second SWAT, kind of recognized by the county in a way.
So with the
I'm
understanding
not saying it
that
would happen.
any
Well,
money that
that's
comes from an
actually-
outside entity always
Good
comes with
funding
strings.
source.
You have strings attached to it, so we talked about being pulled out of the area, I think you recognize
You would
you're
see
gonna be
that
pulled
certainly
even
if
more.
it was extra.
But I'm saying
money
if we were to
funded.
allocate, towards this, and again, maybe this isn't, I'm just trying to brainstorm how to come up with this without, like you said, it's a major purchase, it's $500,000, or there.
There's, the
I'm
short
just trying
answer
to
is there's
bridge.
no way to do that in a relatively short period of time. That's a big sea
Before we
change
commit to it.
politically.
The reality is,
That makes sense.
Pay
And
and figure out how to
we'd
pay
probably
for
take
it.
delivery of this in 2027, the way this budget is set up.
You don't pay for it until you,
There's like usually a deposit, having,
No.
oh, you don't even, well,
You pay for it to fund it.
probably depends on
you
who
have to,
you buy
you
it from.
basically sign saying that the
You're
funds are
signing a
secure.
We're
contract.
committing
right?
to it.
You're
Take-
committing to
Through a
it,
contract.
but you don't actually transfer the funds until you accept delivery of the vehicle.
For the budget, I'd be more comfortable pushing it out 1 year, right, rather than you just said it.
And then have the conversation about purchasing it in 26, but well, when we come back in October, we'll have better sense
can-
of
yeah,
what
we can
money we
talk
have
about
saved,
it.
if that's.
Let's pull it
But
for this budget, but then come back during the budget amendment time.
I think I think after we get to October, we could add it back in and figure out how we're gonna do it.
Right.
What I don't wanna do is say, let's cut it and then have to wait 2 years before we get something that's needed.
You can always amend, so if we remove it from this budget, or what we'll do in the CIP is slide it to 27, so
Yeah,
slide it to 27, but we'll have the conversation, if you decide that you want to move, we can amend it,
leave it on
bring it
skids.
Right.
forward into this 26, we always do. When we get to the 26 budget, we get closer, we'll do amendments because the
Sure.
world will have changed and we'll have, so we can do that.
Which realistically is not that far out, cause we could be talking July of 26, placing an order, taking delivery July of 27, and then we've really only lost 4 or 5 months. I mean, it's not impossible. It's, again, we believe there's an articulable need, which is why we put it in this budget for this discussion. When the timing plays out and all that, is certainly.
And that would remove that removes the deficit that's in there, if, depending on the savings, right?
So can you restate what you think?
So what I have written here, so money's fungible. Let me just say that, it doesn't matter, so,
Yes,
but this is what we're going to do, and these are the dollars we're restricting.
It is somewhat fungible.
Okay, so I'm just saying, we're gonna move money around, but meaning,
It's squishy.
I can spend, if I get $1 here and just the money, I'm not gonna be able to track this dollar exactly to here.
Zach, is
Sorry.
that a new word we didn't talk about?
No,
Don't
that's been
they-
around a long time.
I'll look it up.
Just, it's, yeah, sorry, it's an economics term.
It's
Uh,
saying, I don't want us to buy sandwiches for lunch. But I'm gonna allocate all this money for meals. And you can, or we're gonna save money on
But then you go buy
other.
sodas.
Yeah, I think by soda, right?
Which
It's
is what I
just-
would do.
So,
Okay,
so,
I got
so
it.
Yeah, right,
fun- fungibility
But
is the
it's,
old argument.
you're spending the money on food, you're just not spending it here, you're spending it here, right?
It's always dealt with dictators, so
Sorry,
I'll
sorry.
talk to you later about it. So there's 88,000 or so for the mental health specialist that was part of the tax increase, which is currently reserved. And then there's another 192 plus for the officer, so that comes up to around 280. And it's right there, I'm not gonna do
And
that.
by the way, that's one officer, right?
That-
Keep
that
that in
is
mind.
officer, because
one
it's the
It's about
equipment and everything,
$180,000
It-
That's
it
right.
is,
for one
um,
officer,
Right.
so.
Which was part of what we said, to meet the metrics and have that
Right.
money available to hire
Yep.
them when we hit them.
So that equals about 280.
Remember?
Right, my number's a little over 280,000. That covers that first year. So what we will do is we'll free up that 280, but at the same time, we're going to then take the 292 that we anticipate as new growth and restrict that in the fund.
In the new growth fund.
Why I say it's fungible is, we're just gonna
the
restrict
same
292, we're gonna open up
292,000,
to,
whether it's.
280.
from here or
We're
there.
trying to structurally fix how,
Okay.
where this money goes, so we're not doing
Hey,
this
hold- I
every
need
year,
him, I
so,
need him.
so that we know
So-
where it's gonna be.
I need Nathan.
so we
It's more
got,
predictable.
so that's what we're doing in this year. In the second year, we'll do the same thing, but then we're also going to take it'll change that a little bit, but we'll remove the 430. In the CIP, we're gonna push it into 2027 with the understanding that we will start having a conversation about it once we have what we understand is our savings, the money we didn't spend in 2024. That carry forward savings, we can have that conversation, because again, it is available to council to say, well, let's use that for inflationary growth.
Yeah.
So that's how we'll structure this budget. We do, I think in October, we need to have a conversation about the inflation and how often or how regularly you want to do those,
We could
within
overshoot it by
taxation.
2 years, right, and try and hit a target, right, you know?
cause there is
But maybe we should have added that in last year, the taxation at a higher percentage. That could have fixed a lot of this conversation today.
So the challenge I see is when you have a large fund balance and then you go and ask your public for an increase.
For more money,
I'm just, that feels, you've taken their money, you're holding it, and I get why we're holding it, but it is something you have to try and explain to people.
Well, which,
And it's
which
different.
goes to Steve's point, and to me, this shows how, at least for me, structurally, not just philosophically, but structurally, how this is supposed to work, right? So, and again, the problem with budgets in general, but especially public budgets, increase taxes, here's the money, spend it, hire those people. Now it costs more for those same people next year, right? And then it costs more and more, and we have to go ask for more taxes, and we go through the same thing. And we ask for more taxes because we might not do another increase for 4 or 5 years, so we have to pad it with more inflation. But because that money's there, we hire more people, right? And it's, when I talk about the property tax, and that's gone way higher than inflation, like 3 times the rate of inflation, that's why. So this, what we're seeing here is exactly how it should function, and I'm saying it's perfect, there's plenty of things for us to work out. But we said, yep, we want to set this money aside for these positions. But we don't want to actually hire those positions and spend that money until you demonstrate that it's really needed.
Yeah.
We've been responsible to the public that way. Public, we signaled in that same meeting, we would rather do this and come back to you more frequently for lower increases to cover those inflation costs. But if we've done a great job and we don't need to spend that money, and we didn't, because we told ourselves we had to meet those metrics, then that money we can use instead of coming to for more inflation. Like that makes so much sense, but then we have to talk about the new growth and how we add those things. That's why I said there's the structural pieces. It's building the plane while we're flying it.
Sherry, what's your
So this is one good step in that direction, but then there's more work to do and we need to do it early next year, not in
Sure.
the budgets.
I would just say let's contemplate, moving forward, instead of just depleting that, because we didn't spend it. Maybe we keep enough that if tomorrow all of a sudden we need an officer, all of a sudden we woke up and we hit those metrics, then it's there.
That's the idea.
That's what my concern
A
is.
minimum
That's the
fund balance, you know what I mean, like we're required by the state to have a minimum
Which is why-
fund balance.
But see, that's
Maybe
money
now
that
is
was
not the
reserved in the
time that we
2024 budget
Right,
Buy
right.
that piece
that
of
we're gonna
equipment.
we're
Or
gonna
if
now
we wanna
spend on the
do all of it,
2025.
then we
I'm
do
just saying,
have to
let's
go
make
for
sure
it.
that
But we'll
we
get the
keep-
money in 2025 if we have to hire
Right.
someone.
And
We
just
did
make
a
sure we always
fund
keep
balance
one
policy,
year
did we
of
include
fund
HCC
balance.
in
You know
there?
what I mean?
Yes, so they're required, they're supposed to have 2 months in of operating expenses in the fund balance, of course, because we were starting at 0 last year. I haven't really been contemplating
See,
how we
to me,
build that
that-
up, so that'll
That's a
continue to
lot like
carry.
the UFA one where, yep, there's a big fund balance there, but it's designated for those things, that's not.
Well, and
It's
That
easy for me to
comes-
have
you
that.
can explain that at least, it's when you
Yeah,
start to
yeah.
have
To
one.
me, this is the same thing.
Yeah, me too, when you think about building satellite locations and hiring all the officers for growth and stuff, that money, either that or you get out there and you have to bond for a gazillion dollars to pay for all that
And if
kind
we
of stuff.
plan for it and we don't need it, then we did a great job planning and then we can redeploy those funds instead of asking for more.
Can I ask a point of clarification, just to your point, Sherry? When you talk about the metrics and the available funding, typically we bring requests for personnel to these discussions as part of the budget in the spring. Is that your intent with this? Or, for example, if we reach a metric in October, do you want us to bring that to you at that time and say, we've reached a metric, this is the money that's available in the HCC, our intent is to hire somebody, yes or no? Is that what your intent is, or?
What's your lead time? If you had to hire somebody
So-
tomorrow because you hit a metric, I mean, are you forecasting that metric for
we're
3,
pretty
4,
fast.
6?
Well, so our
got a
metrics
list.
are actually set
We
in
do
a
have a
spot
list
that it
that
should give
people
us a little bit of time to talk.
Yeah.
And that is a key piece, should. But if something happened all of a sudden and we just went from here to there,
Yeah,
I
the
don't
triggers
wanna
come,
get-
the
I
triggers
don't
come
wanna get
before the need, right? And
I
it
don't
was
wanna get
designed that way
behind.
intentionally, that the trigger happens prior to the articulable need, so that it gives us time to have the discussion.
I think that
But
can be an
my
administrative
question is, if that trigger happens in
We-
October,
our hope was that we would have enough time to do it through a regular budget, but again, that
I don't think you should.
criminal
be shy
activity
about
and those things
I don't think so.
doesn't always
But-
follow a perfect path, so we've
In
given ourselves a
2025,
buffer. for
we'll
that.
also get the revenue that we're gonna be setting aside, right?
it. Yeah,
What we're talking about is taking 2024 money that we didn't spend,
right.
right?
Correct.
And using that in 2025. In the 2025 budget, we'll get that money coming in,
Right.
it's still reserved. If they had to hire somebody quick, the money's
No,
already
yeah,
there
I
in the
just,
budget.
my only thing was, that let's just make sure we always have
Year to year, we
year to
don't,
year that
we don't
reserve,
wanna
don't
deplete.
deplete it.
Yeah.
Because you might, and I don't think you should ever be shy about coming and saying, hey, we hit these metrics, we're not in the spring, but we're in November and we really need an officer, then
I
you need
think
an
that's a
officer.
really good thing, is money that we didn't spend in the last budget, using it to offset a tax increase is awesome.
Yeah.
Taking money that we've budgeted for something and using that for something else, and then having to do a tax increase because we spent the money we shouldn't have spent, that's something different.
And so to be, I don't wanna put words in your mouth, but it kind of dovetails with what you're saying, is that what Steve's proposing is that this is the fix for right now, but we fully intend to do that going forward, right? Those funds are still reserved, but we're trying to fly the plane and build at the same time, so we're trying to fix one issue at a time. Right, our intention was to have all of it done, but we didn't do all of it. We put in some, kind of the foundation pieces, we built the frame, right? Now we've gotta finish it this next year, so this is, like I said, 2 decisions, we're flying with the frame right now, how do we keep it going? This is a good stopgap, for lack of a better term. And yeah, September, October, we need to finish building the rest of it to help us go forward.
Okay, so let me help try to wrap this up. Nathan, can you go, I wanna make sure, cause it seemed like there was some confusion. You tell, I don't want council to comment right now, I want Nathan to tell
but-
us
Just kidding.
what he understood, and then 3 head nods and we move on.
This is what I've understood, is we are going to use funds that we raised last time, so the 88 for the mental health and the officer, combine that, it's about 280. We are going to bring that into the operating budget to cover the inflationary pieces. We are then, at the same time, going to take the new growth that will be reserved in the fund balance in 2025. We will also then take the vehicle, the SWAT vehicle, excuse that, slide that into 2027 with the understanding that we will have a conversation starting in October of this year about whether we pull it forward, how we're going to do that. The savings that the savings we anticipate carrying forward will help offset, because we'll still use this money in 2026 to 2026. That's how we're going, and we'll reserve the new, we call new growth, because it's the only growth we get in there is from the new homes being built, our new commercial. We'll reserve that in this biennial in the fund balance. So that's what I heard.
And you'll
Three
tag
head
it,
nods,
right?
three head nods.
Yeah.
It's,
You'll tag
it's,
it with
it's,
zero.
yeah, we'll reserve it, so.
Even now, you'll see at the bottom of the budget, it shows the restrictions.
They're restricted, so we're
Jared, head
restricted.
nod, yes, yes,
Yeah.
okay, I don't even.
That's,
One other thing I'd like to point out before we move on, just for your consumption, the 60,000 and 26 for the Versaterm case service is, that's actually a new service. It's online reporting is what that is, and that's done through our records management provider. That's not a requirement. That's something that we have looked at internally and said we can articulate a need for. We've had a lot of interest in online reporting and people wanting to report incidents other than calling dispatch. This is the solution that's offered through our provider, and so we put it in 26 to allow us a year or so to study the numbers of the types and the amount of calls that could potentially be answered through that service. But that would allow us to have something on our website, social media pages, where people can actually click the link and go
That's
in
cool.
and use AI. It's an AI tool is what it is. That there is some management piece on the back end, so we still control the records that are coming into the department and whether or not they get assigned a case number to
Which
kind
should
of filter
increase
out.
efficiency and
Should reduce our need for
prevent us from needing to hire another person.
needing to hire another officer, and should increase our efficiency for the officers that we have who may not necessarily, we'll take a lot of those lower priority calls hopefully and direct them to that, which will free up our officers on the street. So that's what that is. There's a one-time cost, which is the 60,000. There's an annual increase to our Versaterm contract that's in our subscriptions, that's about 20, I think it's 18 or 20,000. For that service, that's what that is. So the 60,000 is one time for the implementation, but that's what Case Service is an AI online reporting tool, which we've actually had a lot of interest for in our community, so just wanted to.
So I have just a really quick comment. I was part of a budget process in a neighboring county. They allotted $12 a year per officer for training. $12 a year per officer for training. I promise you that if I'm in the seat, that will never happen here. But I respect.
You'll get $7.50.
once a month for training.
Yeah.
we can drink.
But I
It'll
respect.
never be less than $13.
Yeah, but I really respect you going through your budget and really seeing, is there ways that we can cut without cutting safety to our officers or training so that they're best equipped. So we're pushed back on this piece of equipment, this $500,000 piece of equipment. It has nothing to do with anything. We have a massive desire to keep our officers safe. They need to go home to their families at night, right?
Every
They need,
time.
or in the morning, or whatever swing shift they're on. They need to go home safely. But we just have to figure out responsible ways to cover it and pay for it too.
Question, speed trailers effective?
Very. We actually have a lot of applications for them. So the two that are in this budget and the 25 budget and the 26 budget, we're looking to replace older assets that we actually inherited from our previous law enforcement service provider. That's how old they are. The speed trailers are very high in demand. We have a very long waiting list of resident requests for usage. It's a multi-use tool, so we can use it as an emergency signboard for messaging. We use that in our road closures and parades and stuff like that. We can actually capture speed data with it as well without the sign flashing. So we work with engineering all the time when we're looking at speed studies on particular roads. Sometimes the tubes are efficient, Sometimes our sign is more efficient, just depending on the circumstance, and so we'll place the signboard out, and let it capture data before we actually even do any enforcement. So yeah, it's definitely a very useful tool for us, and the two, we have one that's relatively new that we purchased a couple years ago on a grant. The other two that we have are relatively aged, and they're no longer supported. The technology in them is no longer supported, so we're looking to replace them.
They don't address long-term engineering issues with the road where it's too
Yeah.
wide and too fast. They'll have a short term, but the data they can collect.
The
and they'll-
data
They're usually really good in neighborhoods, I think, to try and
Yeah.
start to get.
The data is very useful in a lot of the conversations that we have in
Can help
neighborhoods.
warrant changes that need to be made.
If you put it on, cause you thought people were going too fast on 134th and put it out there, what you would see is they're going fast, and it would never slow them down.
No, that's fair. Are you done? You good then? I don't mean to like.
We have another budget, but.
Yeah,
Yeah, we got the non.
That was just the
non-
15 fund.
That was just the officers. This is animal control and code enforcement and the conversation we have to have about crossing guards.
Okay, so here we go.
Dude, we're in here and have to make a motion to go into the next day, we're at least have an hour and a half.
No,
This,
this one will be easy.
yeah, this one's not as,
This one should be fast.
this one doesn't have as much detail, but so as you can see, the increase request in 25 is about 150,000. Of note, there is a vehicle replacement being proposed for animal services. That's 73,000. And then between the operating and debt service, so once again, similar to police, we have to treat our building lease for the animal services as a capital lease, so it's included as debt service, which is a change in the budget. In addition, there is a rent increase that's in the contract, and then also the CAM fee, so our common area maintenance fees are also increasing. The personnel also includes crossing guards, so there is, as Nathan had mentioned, there's a proposal to increase the number of crossings from 42 to 47, so that is the jump in the ongoing request in personnel in 25. 26 is a fairly low $40,000 increase. There's no capital request. That is strictly anticipated COLA and then just regular operating increases. We did budget in the increase for the lease at the animal services building, and then we also built in an expected increase in the camp costs. So I've gone over a lot of this already, so this is just a breakdown of on the personnel. The COLA health insurance retirement increase for employees is about 16.6, and then the 5 additional crossings, and then also the proposal is to apply the COLA to the crossing guards, to all of the crossing guards, but that total, the additional crossings and then the COLA is about 23,000 increase.
That takes them to 1650 starting.
16 and change.
So yeah, so we're at 1550 right now. The proposal with the COLA increase would move them to just over 16. I think it's 1603, and then in 26 would move them up to about 1652. So that's pretty much where HR says they should be, is that 1650 range based on the market. So
As I had mentioned on the building lease and common area maintenance, that is an increase of 32,890. That is stipulated in the contract. Animal Services is requesting a vehicle replacement. I did input all of the detail in your packet. You'll also see it next week when we have our next council meeting, when we have the CIP discussion. I did include all the vehicle requests in there also. 26 is fairly tame. It's just small anticipated cost increases and operating, and then a possible COLA. With that, is there any questions on the non-police part of public safety? Anything else?
I could, you keep looking at me,
Oh,
I could if you
sorry.
want me to.
No,
When is the school district gonna take?
He's looking at you because he's gonna throw something at you.
okay.
Maybe do that one first next time.
I tried.
Get the tough stuff out of the way first.
That's it now.
Doing close.
Alright, I'm done.
Not another one.
So let's say, it's not the easiest process, but thank you to
I
everybody
think they're-
for participating and
Right,
having
we
the
do have to
discussion.
close that.
Really appreciate it, and I think we're being innovative and
What?
heading in the right direction.
Yeah,
Others
it's
are-
just, I flat at 6 a.m. on
Okay.
the 23rd, I don't wanna do it then.
Okay. Okay. We need to go into closed for, is it a different one now?
Personnel,
One?
whichever one
A.
is.
Okay.
I don't have that sheet in front of me, so.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to temporarily recess city council meeting, go into closed meeting for the following purposes as provided in Utah State Code annotated section 52-4-205. Discussion of the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual.
okay, Jared?
This one is, I guess.
Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yeah.
Steve? Yes. Nobody. So just you? Just me. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.